A little bit of background. On the 26th of February last year, Kevin Lau, who had served as editor of the Ming Pao newspaper, was attacked on the streets of Hong Kong by knife-wielding assailants, and he nearly lost his life. At the time of the assault, he'd been at the center of a press freedom controversy following his removal from the paper's editorship. He'd held the post for only 2 years, during which Ming Pao conducted investigations into politically sensitive topics. It also joined an investigation by the Internal Consortium of Investigative Journalists into offshore bank accounts held by members of the Chinese elite. After the stabbing attack, thousands of local and overseas journalists marched to show their support for him and to voice their concern about the pressures on press freedom in Hong Kong. Today, he's the COO of Medianet Resources Limited, responsible for new media development and education publishing. He joined Ming Pao in 1995 and has served as editorial writer, Beijing bureau chief, executive chief editor, and chief editor. He previously worked at the Hong Kong Economic Journal as political news reporter, legal columnist, and financial news reporter. He served on the executive committee of the Hong Kong Journalists Association and sits on the executive committee of the Hong Kong News Executive Association. He's also a longtime colleague and friend, and it really is a personal pleasure to ask Kevin Lau to come and speak. Kevin.
Dear guests and friends, in the past 2 years, people have frequently asked whether press freedom in Hong Kong was under threat. Now I think the answer is crystal clear. It is. In this sense, now is the worst time to be a journalist in Hong Kong. For those of you who still have any doubts about this, who still believe that the Hong Kong press still enjoys the same freedom that it used to have, let me ask you a few questions. How often do you see the proprietor of a highly popular newspaper coming out to admit publicly that mainland controlled corporations, including major banks and telecom companies, are withholding advertisements for political considerations? How often do you see the owner of a highly popular news website coming out to admit publicly that he was closing down his news operation for fear of political reprisal? How often do you see a commercial broadcaster shutting up a highly popular current affairs program host by suddenly terminating her contract? How often do you see 100 reporters, editors, and anchors of a major television station signing a joint public statement to criticize the news handling decision of their news controller? How often do you see a veteran journalist who had been the chief editor of an influential newspaper being brutally attacked with a chopper outside a public park in broad daylight? When these unbelievable things all happened within a time span of 12 to 15 months, do you think it is pure coincidence? For every single incident mentioned here, one might say that perhaps it was an isolated case, that perhaps it was not directly related to press freedom. However, when they came out one after another like dominoes, the effects on public perception and public confidence was debilitating. I have stayed in this field for over 25 years. I know the climate changes when I see the signs. This is not the first time. Back in 2003 to 2004, when we had a similar situation of an unpopular chief executive trying to sell an unpopular policy to the public, we would see powerful people stretching their muscles to try to stem out any critical voices in the mainstream media. Last time, the unpopular policy was national security legislation. This time, it is universal suffrage with a nomination screening mechanism. History is repeating itself. If you need more evidence to prove that press freedom in Hong Kong is really under threat, I would refer you to the numerous statements and reports published by the Hong Kong Journalists Association, the Foreign Correspondents Club, or other professional organizations. The alarm bell has been rung again and again. You may also look at findings of journalism professors at local universities on media self-censorship, which has gone up, and media credibility, which has gone down. The latest signal of this worrying trend is the government decision not to prosecute a criminal suspect who was alleged to have assaulted 2 television journalists performing their duty of reporting in a public gathering. The apparent reason was that the suspect and the actors were allowed to wear hats and masks, covering most of their faces in the identification parade, which rendered the victim's task of identifying the attacker impossible. Recently, I was asked by some young journalism students whether they should join the news profession in light of all these unfavorable developments. I told them all the inconvenient truths. The sad reality is that in many respects, now is probably the worst time to be a journalist in Hong Kong. But nonetheless, I advise them to go ahead and become journalists if they are really interested in news reporting. Why? Because in other respects, now is also the best time to become a journalist in Hong Kong with an eye on the future. Hong Kong will maintain its role as an international financial center. This is a simple fact recognized by everyone, including the authorities in Beijing. The Chinese leaders may have a different view from the local community regarding democratic developments in Hong Kong. But there's no dispute on Hong Kong's role as an international financial center. During the Occupy movement last year, Beijing gave the green light for the cross-market stock purchases program between Shanghai and Hong Kong. The timing of the decision surprised many people. It reflects a strong determination to keep Hong Kong's stock market vibrant and useful for mainland enterprises to raise capital. As we all know, a truly international financial center must maintain an environment where there is a free flow of information. You cannot shut Bloomberg down. You cannot ban Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. Last year, when the Apple Daily's highly popular news website was paralyzed by hackers, apparently coming from the north, they decided to upload all their digital news onto Facebook and YouTube. Unless you could shut down the entire internet, you could not stop them from publishing their stories. As a result, the attacks stopped. Digital news is a totally new ballgame. In the past, we, the editors in charge of the newsrooms of mainstream media outlets, dictated what the public could read or watch. We, the editors, decided which item went on the front page and became headline news. Now the game has changed. in the digital world, the crowd decides which piece of news they would prefer to read and to share. This crowd judging and crowd sharing has changed the balance of power between the editors and the readers. The accumulated hit rate and online viewership of any news item depends on the crowd, not the editors. Also, the 24 hours real-time functioning nature of the highly transparent digital news world renders media self-censorship extremely difficult. If a newsroom chief in Hong Kong decides to ban a piece of newsworthy digital material from publication, he or she may soon find the material spreading like wildfire on the internet, and the decision to censor it will quickly become a news story in itself. For young people who grew up in the digital age, they can acquire the invaluable communication skills necessary in the new era much more quickly than their senior news managers or executives. They know how to push the gist of the news to their readers' smartphones, apps, or social network. They know how to make it sticky and catchy. In just a few years, they would have accumulated online news making and spreading experiences that cannot be matched by traditional journalists, even those with 20 years of experiences. Diving into the digital news world might be a risky business for some media organizations. Subscriptions are hard to find. Until recently, advertising revenue was thin. But the scene is quickly changing. Online advertising has been growing at a double-digit year-on-year since 2013. Readership migration from traditional to digital is unstoppable. In the coming few years, digital first will no longer be a slogan. It will become a business necessity. Young journalists have nothing to lose if they dive into this trend right now. So, in this respect, now is the best time to be a journalist of the new media in Hong Kong. Thank you.